he dared to touch Louise's body, which made him want to do that right now, and they started making love. After they did that, the film starts by showing a woman named Louise. Louise works as the head of the arts department at a state university in Canada. Louise often feels lonely after divorcing her ex-husband Peter. Louise and Peter still spend time together, like old friends who are close. After having lunch with Peter, Louise returns to her office. There, Louise finds a stack of job applications for the assistant position she's been looking for. One application catches her attention, from a man named Scott. Louise immediately contacts Scott by phone, inviting him for an interview the next day. Louise also asks Scott to bring his application letter in person. While rummaging through old items, Louise discovers an old box. Inside, there's a piece of paper with a name Scott. The paper also contains a sketch of a man's face, which makes Louise's heart heavy. The next day, Louise prepares at the office. However, time passes, and Scott doesn't show up. Louise talks to her friend Missy, who gave her the job information. Unexpectedly, Missy tells her that Scott has actually been missing for the last 20 years. But in the middle of her confusion, Scott finally appears. He walks in confidently, handing his application letter to Louise. After Louise examined Scott's painting, he offered to let Scott stop by his apartment and chat about his painting. And while there, they talked while drinking beer, and during that conversation, Scott asked if she had ever been painted without clothes. And after Scott asked that, he dared to touch Louise's body, which made him want to do that right now, and they started making love. After they did that, she then changed her clothes because the clothes she was wearing were wrinkled from playing too rough with Scott. Scott was seen calling his mother, updating her on what had just happened. It was clear how much Scott loved his mother, and it touched Louise deeply. The next day, Louis called Messy and said that he was very happy because he had just met a man who was younger than him, and he also said that now he had found his passion in life again after not feeling love for several years. Not long after, she met her ex-husband, Peter. From the joyful expression on Louise's face, Peter immediately realized that someone had made her fall in love again. Their conversation continued in Louis's apartment. There, Peter told everyone that he had actually cheated on her when they were still married. Peter also talked about and admitted that he had a relationship with Louis's younger brother, who was a man. Hearing that, Louise's heart shattered. She felt angry and betrayed, immediately kicking Peter out of her apartment. The next day, Scott came over to Louise's apartment again, and there Scott asked about Louis's angry face, and he said that he was only angry with Peter, his ex-husband. Seeing Louise's state, Scott tried to comfort her, promising to do whatever it took to make her happy, and to make Louis happy again. Scott invited Louis to go to a bar, and there Scott gave some sweet words to make Louis smile again, so that because he was carried away by the atmosphere, they ended up kissing. Not long after, Scott's friend Ricky came and decided to join them. Without any hesitation, Ricky bluntly told Louise that Scott was actually a playboy. But at that time, Louis didn't care about Scott's friend's words, which he thought weren't true. And Louis then asked Scott about his friend Messy. Louis asked about Scoot, who came to Messy's house when they had never known each other. Without hesitation, Scott explained that his meeting with Missy was only to learn more about Louise. Louise, who believed Scott's explanation, finally felt relieved. After returning to the apartment, Scott invited Louise to stand in front of the mirror together and asked her to imagine if Scott were her ex-husband. Louise promised that one day she would be the one to wear a tie for Scott. And after Louis imagined that, they then did it again to enjoy Louise's bananas. The next morning, Louise woke up alone. Scott wasn't by her side, and Louise felt disappointed and shattered, feeling like she had been used by Scott. Louise, who at that time felt sad because he had been abandoned by Scoot, then went to his mother's house, and there she cried next to her mother, saying that her day was ruined because there were no more men approaching her. Louise felt there was no man she could trust anymore, not even her own brother. Unable to bear her disappointment, Louise immediately interrogated Sammy, her brother, and asked why this had happened. Louis's younger brother also said that when Louis was with Peter, he was too busy with his work, which made Peter lonely, and in that loneliness, Peter paid himself to fight bananas. Louise left the house and decided to go see her best friend, Missy, to ask where Scott was. But instead of telling her where Scott was, Messy instead said that Scott was not satisfied with Louis, so Scott came to him and they played together. Hearing that, Louis became angry with Messy, who was his best friend, who had done that to Scott, and he then left Messy's house while looking disappointed on his face. Louise met Scott again, who was waiting in front of her apartment. Louise couldn't hold back her disappointment and immediately asked why Scott would betray her by secretly being with Missy. However, Scott quickly denied it and said that it was actually Missy who had been flirting with him. The next day, Scott came to Louis's apartment. There he saw Peter, who was also there. And a fight broke out between them, because at that time they actually still wanted Louis. But at that time, Peter relented and he then left Louis's apartment. However, After the argument with Peter was over, a new argument arose between Scott and Louise. Scott expressed that he felt disappointed in Louise for meeting with her ex-husband again. Louis said that they weren't doing anything in his apartment, and Scott, who at that time still hadn't received Louis's answer, then left Louis. At another time, seeing her friend growing sadder, Missy finally revealed the truth. She and Scott had been making plans for Louis so that she would fight to find her true love and not fail in love again. After that conversation, Louise began to realize how important it was to care more about herself. The next day, she improved her life by exercising and managing her time well. And she also came to Peter to say that now they don't have any relationship anymore and she wants to forget Peter. One day, Louise went to an art exhibition held by Scott. As soon as she entered the exhibition hall, Louise was immediately captivated by Scott's incredible artwork. At that time, Scott thanked Louis because he was able to work at the university thanks to his help. However, at that time, Louis said that the achievements he had now were the result of his own work and there was no interference from Louis. After that they walked together and they stopped briefly to kiss on the university field and the film ended.